Want to find your seat for the event of your choice but can't get one that fits your desire or your budget? Well, my friends, SeatGeek has you covered. SeatGeek is the official sponsor of the Snake Sports Talk Show. With a list of over hundreds of events to choose from, SeatGeek will assure you that you won't miss your seat with the amazing view of your choice at the most affordable price. Whether it's looking for your best seat in the house of your favorite sports team, finding live concerts to get you closer to your favorite artist, or enjoying your spot at your favorite live shows, comedies, and more, SeatGeek has it all just for you. Go online to SeatGeek.com or download the app on your mobile device through Google Play and the App Store. And as a special offer before checkout, use promo code SNAKESPORTS and save yourself $20 off of your purchase of your first ticket and experience why SeatGeek is the most trusted ticketing app for your next event. Remember, that's SeatGeek.com and download the app on your phone with promo code SNAKESPORTS for $20 off and find your seat with SeatGeek.
And now, broadcasting live from Las Vegas, the Snake Sports Talk Show with Jake Silva starts now.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, here we go on a wild and what we may see may be an interesting Wednesday considering Game 3, Dallas and Boston. How are we going to see this tonight? This is the Snake Sports Talk Show wherever and however you may be watching and listening. Thanks for making us a part of your evening. We are live on all platforms known to man, Roku, iHeartRadio, and all social platforms where you can like, follow, and subscribe and hit the bell button to keep you up to date on future and past episodes. If yesterday wasn't enough with the 3 interviews we had, grab a seat, enjoy some popcorn because we got a lot here for you. Ryan Clary locked on Nationals. We got Brice Lewis with Bleav in the Atlanta Hawks. We got so much for you guys. It's going to be an exciting one. I will be talking a little bit more about Dallas and Boston here a little later on, but just something that I wanted to basically bring to everybody's attention. And I know sometimes when we hear news like this all the time, we got to bring it up. And it's one that's very heartfelt. So it seemed like in the span of a few days, we have lost many iconic people. Just a few days ago, we lost the great Bill Walton. And today we've lost arguably one of the most iconic people, Jerry West. Now, many people that I'm sure, like myself, who watch documentaries and also listen to documentary podcasts, you want to know what it was like to live in the era, to be in that person's shoes, and what it was like to basically, play in a sporting era where it was filled with toughness, it was competitive, and basically what it was shaping for what the sport of basketball was all about. Jerry West certainly was a character of his own. Now, many people, including myself, who may have watched Winning Times, how you kind of portray the character. Some people will think, man, was Jerry West just that angry? It kind of seemed like he was a little bit up on Tourette's when it kind of seemed like he was screaming obscenities and all the rest of it. I mean, was that what he was like? Look, when you're Hollywood, you portray a lot of things. Sometimes they're either are accurate or sometimes that was a little out of left field. But let me tell you the real true story of Jerry West. I mean, one of one, a most iconic character type player, a guy that was very competitive, played in arguably one of the most prestigious organizations in the Los Angeles Lakers. And with his competitiveness, and he played around a lot of great guys, Wilt Chamberlain, multiple others, but also played against great iconic players like Bill Russell and more others. And Jerry just was the kind of guy that you knew was very tough on his teammates. He was tough on coaching staffs, but he was also tough on himself because he was very competitive and was passionate, had a character that was a one of a kind. If you looked at Jerry West back then and plugged him into today's game as of right now, you probably would have thought of what the hell is wrong with this guy? This guy's just overly competitive. And man, he's screaming in my face and like, but that was the kind of player he was. That was the kind of person that he held everyone accountable. And in the end, as a player, trips to the finals, championships, MVPs, Jerry West, there ain't no other player that could repeat even close to what he does. Now, we've had a lot of memorable and we've had a lot of iconic players in the game that really solidified what the NBA is turning into and what it is today. And Jerry West was responsible for multiple things. He was responsible for getting the Lakers into the finals and winning, finals MVP, winning multiple MVPs as well as a player, but also was a Lakers head coach for years, was also an executive. He was responsible with as far as the trade for Kobe Bryant. He was also responsible for signing Shaquille O'Neal, arguably one of the best tall guys, big size, one of the biggest big size centers that you could think of possible in NBA history. And we've had many, but he was responsible for that. Spent a lot of his years, won a championship as an executive as well. And I mean, he's been very close with 3 organizations, all of Los Angeles between the Lakers and the Clippers, but also was very close with the Golden State Warriors. But eventually, he was responsible for signing Kawhi Leonard. You had to bring in a star in Los Angeles on the other side with the Clippers. You also had to bring in a very good Robin next to him in Paul George that you traded for. I mean, Jerry West was a smart guy. He knew talent when he could find it. But he also was a big-time motivator when it felt like you had players who were very talented on paper and some of them that kind of got into their own heads. Knew exactly the words to say, knew exactly the motivation they needed to get the best out of those stars. Jerry West, of course, is also what you see every year, every game, the iconic silhouette logo. And what will forever be etched with Jerry West is he was a one of a kind and was somebody with a big personality and someone who really kind of changed the landscape of the game and brought in many, many different stars and played alongside or even had played against many great stars, Hall of Famers. And you know what's funny is that we even thought of another Laker who also passed, but passed very young, that we thought of could potentially be the next silhouette logo. Oh yeah, that was another Laker, Kobe Bryant. You may have heard of him. I mean, you don't come across many players, many icons like this that you just can't help but embrace what they've done, how they built a lot of these players, and at the same time, how they really shaped the landscape of the sport. Jerry West, and the great thing is, and I have one too. I have a Jerry West cut like old classic, the blue and that icy white. You guys might recall the old school 60s, 70s. It's iconic. But Jerry West, May you rest in paradise, my friend. Thank you for what you've given us with the landscape of basketball and in the NBA. You will forever be etched as one of the many greats. And boy, the fact that we still can embrace the silhouette logo that we could just see, whether it's on jerseys, whether it's on advertisements, whether it's anywhere, we can still embrace that logo. Rest in paradise, my friend, and we will see you once again soon. Baseball season has been fantastic. We're already in the month of June. We're in the middle of it, and this is where things really start to kind of heat up. But joining us, of course, covering the Washington Nationals, and I had another one of a baseball mind as well that covered the Tigers, talking about youth movements and what we see right now currently in baseball, big markets, small markets, and of course, a lot of the middle of the pack markets. But joining us to talking a lot and showing off his natitude for the Washington Nationals, Ryan Clary. So when you think about the state of the NL East, I mean, the Phillies are just top-notch, chock full of talent. The Atlanta Braves lost their talent due to an injury. And then there's also a couple of those teams that are lingering from the outside coming in. So when you look at the Washington Nationals and the state of this, this group in the farm system, Joey Meneses, CJ Abrams, and I mean, there is a bunch of these young, promising players that I think Washington can get themselves right back up on track to building the confidence, building at least, the competitive nature. I mean, how have you really seen this covering the Nationals for as long as you have, and what the momentum train is looking like for them?
You kind of touched on it a lot there, Jake. And honestly, talking about this Nationals team, we went into this season knowing that it was going to be a youth movement. And looking at CJ Abrams, he has kind of been that guy. And honestly, if you look at this offense, the offense is going to go as far as CJ Abrams will go. And I think Nationals fans, some people did expect that, but honestly, not really to this extent. Like in tonight's game, he's got a home run and a double going up against those Tigers that you were just talking about here. So CJ Abrams, I mean, he has kind of been the focal point of the Nationals so far. You even have a lot of starting pitchers who have come up through the system. Jake Irvin being one of those guys. He's starting in tonight's game as well, looking really good so far. Another kind of surprising guy has been left-handed pitcher Mitchell Parker, who looked really good in last night's game. This is someone who now has a sub 3.2 ERA on the season through his first 11 starts as a big leaguer. I mean, this is not something that you were really expecting. Then, of course, Mackenzie Gore as well, someone who is also in that Padres trade. I mean, the Nationals, they do have a nice little youth movement. And fortunately for us, there's going to be a lot more of that to come over the next year or so.
Yeah, and I mean, this is what, a lot of the youth, the many organizations that we know. I mean, when you got the Nationals who have, fresh from a title in 2019, which I thought was very remarkable in the way that they did it. I mean, People wrote this team off, and then they just caught fire the second that they ended up getting all the way to the World Series and winning it all. So when you think about, you got the championship on the belt, and then you start to think about, well, we've got some future pieces we really would like to build around. One in particular that I thought was pretty sneaky good to grab, and in the middle of that, and I'm sure you know who I'm talking about, Keibert Ruiz. When you get him from the Dodgers, I mean, in that trade that sent those two big-time players there, but there's some future promise with at least of it. I loved his play. I think he could definitely be a star catcher in the future, that a guy that could really show some promise, not in just the Nationals, but even for the National League in the future.
You know what? Keibert Ruiz, the one thing with him that's really kind of held him back is defense at this point. And, a lot of baseball people, they like to look at their offense. And even then, Keibert Ruiz's offense this year has not been good. And that has kind of been one of the things that are really holding him back, is staying consistent. I mean, 2 years ago, when he had his first full season up in the majors, he did show some promise. He got a lot better in the second half. Last year did look really good as well. Had an injury struggle there for a little bit during the summer, but Keibert Ruiz, the one thing that has kind of held him back is, again, that consistency part of this. And so far this season, he had a sickness that he was put on the IL for. He lost nearly 25 pounds over a few weeks. I mean, that is insane no matter what you look at, especially for a professional athlete. So Keibert Ruiz, I mean, he has struggled this year, but as you said, he does have the upside. He does have that power. He hasn't really necessarily been able to show that off all too much up to this point in 2024, but there is still a lot of promise. He's still young. He's still in his mid-20s. He signed an extension just last year. He's going to be here for the long run. And I think if Keibert Ruiz, if you were to find some way to just have some consistency in his game, in particular his offense, then this Nationals team would be a lot better off. And obviously, this team has not been all that bad this year. I mean, you're still in a rebuild. You're close to kind of getting out of that and really contending for a wild card spot. But still, this is still a rebuild. It's a youth movement. And Keibert Ruiz, he's going to be at the forefront of that. If you can get some consistent play out of him, especially on the offensive side of things, I think we'll be pretty good.
Yeah, and especially in a division like the NL East, when you start facing against Atlanta and Philadelphia, and I mean, we kind of already know what we're getting with the Miami Marlins, but in the end, this could very much be a team that I could see things go all well. You start moving up and in the ranks in the division. If they come out as a team that, they finish third, they finish second, there's some interesting stuff there. But when I look at the pitching staff, I mean, Patrick Corbin, veteran, he basically kind of serves as that guy that can be very vocal for a lot of these young guys, Mackenzie Gore. And even when I look at Jake Irvin, when you think of the pitching staff and what they are really kind of building and looking like, I mean, the starting rotation, it's going to definitely get there where it'll be deeper and it'll be a lot more consistent. But at least with the top guys, these are some guys that I think could very much show up and really play as well to their abilities.
You know what, like talking about the starting pitchers here, and I kind of got into it a little bit in that first segment, but as you said, this is kind of something that the Nationals have really struggled with over the years. Like you look back at the days with Steven Strasburg, obviously I could have developed that. Jake, you could have developed him as well. I mean, he was one of the better pitching prospects coming out of college in quite some time. You talk about another one with Jordan Zimmerman way back in the day. He was someone that the Nationals did develop, but they haven't really developed pitching since then. So now you start to see these guys come through the minors, go through the development process. And you're seeing guys like Jake Irvin. Cade Cavalli is another one of those guys who's a first-round pick back in 2020 who's recovering from Tommy John surgery, who should be back up in the majors at some point this summer. And you see all these guys now coming up through the minor league system, being developed, and then also hitting the ground running in the major leagues. I mean, this is a huge development for a team that, number one, has not really spent that much money over the last few years. So if you're not going to spend money in free agency, what's the other way to do that? What is the other way to fill holes? Well, it's developing prospects, and that is what the Nationals have done. And in my opinion, it's been one of the better surprises of the 2024 season. Seeing guys like Jake Irvin really take a step up this year, Mitchell Parker come up from the minors, kind of really out of nowhere. If you're a big Nationals fan, if you really follow the minor leagues and you've heard his name, but even then, he was like your 20th best prospect. He comes up and he's looking like a front-of-the-line starter through his first 11 starts, and he did that yesterday against the Tigers as well. So if you're a Nationals fan right now, there's a lot of optimism out there, especially starting with the starting pitching. I mean, they have been the biggest surprise in really not even just the Nationals world. It's probably the biggest surprise in the NL East, the way that these young starting pitchers have really just pitched their butts off so far in 2024.
Yeah, and so when you think about it, because we do it every year. We vote on all-stars. We vote on some, guys that are going to represent, the clubhouse, in the all-star game. So when you think about it with as far as all-star votes, and in your opinion with what you've seen with the Nationals, who do you think could very much be that top guy that is going to represent the Washington Nationals come the all-star game?
I look at closer Kyle Finnegan right now. I mean, Kyle Finnegan last year at this time, there were some struggles, but a lot of people still believed in him. And he finished the year off really strong in the second half. And so far this season, he has been one of, if not the best closer in all of the National League at this point. I mean, he has been someone who is second in the NL in saves at this point. And again, he's going to continue to pile that on as the season goes on. Kyle Finnegan has been very good for this team. He was signed right before 2020. Not really many people heard about him too much. He was signed from the minors with the Oakland Athletics, came in, just kind of played his role as like a seventh inning guy, then kind of moved in the later innings as he kind of progressed through the major leagues. But so far, he has been the Nationals closer for the last 2 seasons, and he has been a very good surprise for this team. He's developed into one of the better closers in all of the National League at this point. You don't really hear about him too much because, again, the Nationals didn't have that many save scenarios last year compared to a lot of better teams out there, like whether it's the Dodgers. But I've always said this. If you were to place him on a very good team and he was going to be their closer, you'd be talking about this guy a lot more. He's got a sub-2 ERA. He's nasty with it. He's got a lot of different pitches that he can use back in his arsenal, and he has been probably the most valuable piece in this bullpen by far. And even then, if you look across the NL East at this point, he's probably been the best closer in the NL East, and that goes a really long way when you have a lot of different guys like Edwin Diaz for the New York Mets, obviously, a lot of different pieces, Alvarado for the Philadelphia Phillies. So he has been a very pleasant surprise. I do see him representing the Nationals at the All-Star game in Arlington, Texas this year. That would be my vote.
Man, I think it would be great. And I'll tell you what, though, especially when you look at Major League Baseball and what it's really pivoted to, you can never not have enough relief pitching. I mean, these are guys that are like big-time staples that really do help out. Yes, you can, again, with the development of the starting rotation is one thing, but when you've got bullpens, hey, I needed you to come in the 6th, the 7th, the 8th, and then right there up at the 9th, when it's very crucial, you got to find ways to deliver. And I mean, I just have always been amazed with closers like that can come in, execute, do the job, and really is like, that's the big staple for any team that you have.
Yeah, exactly. And, and as you were kind of saying there, I mean, you're only going to go as far in October as your bullpen will go. And going back and looking back at the 2019 Nationals team when they won the World Series, that bullpen was an awful bullpen, but they had a few pieces there where they could just kind of hang on to. And obviously they had the big starting rotation with Scherzer, Strasburg, and all the other different pieces. Patrick Corbin in that equation as well. A lot of different guys helping out from the bullpen, but you had Daniel Hudson, your closer, that you traded from that deadline. I mean, he was nails in the second half for the Nationals. You had Sean Doolittle, that proven vet who was the closer before Daniel Hudson, who got in there. He was nails down that stretch. You had a young guy with Tanner Rainey, who was nails in that postseason stretch as well. And again, Patrick Corbin at times in the World Series and as well as the NLCS come out of the bullpen and shutting the door and ultimately getting the win in Game 7 of the World Series. So your bullpen is an integral part of a postseason run. So let's just say if the Nationals were to make a postseason run at this point, I don't think they will. You'd be in pretty good hands because you do have some pieces in there like Kyle Finnegan, your closer, like Hunter Harvey, like Robert Garcia, who's been a left-handed pitcher, has looked good. Dylan Floro, another guy who's had a lot of postseason experience under his belt as well with the Dodgers and the Twins. Those are all really integral pieces to a potential postseason run. And as you were saying, the bullpen, it means a lot in the postseason, and that's really what will get you to the World Series and beyond.
So we know right now, especially up in this month of June, is not only that we've got Major League Baseball play, but we've also got the College World Series that we know. Very fun, very exciting, and we've seen some promising pieces that can come in, build, develop, and turn into future superstars when the time is right. So we know right now that drafting and developing is such a big thing. I mean, we watch the NFL be so king when it comes to draft and development because these are guys that are ready to compete right now. And I know in baseball, it takes a little bit of time, but if you get through the tiers from, the single, the double, triple A, and onward to the show, I mean, that's where you really know there's some promise to the future. So when you look at the College World Series and then eventually when you get to the MLB draft, have there been some future prospects that you may have kept an eye on that could be something interesting for the Nationals to really help to build through this draft and develop?
There are a couple different pieces this year, and for the Nationals specifically, I would probably go that pitcher route. There's one arm from Iowa, I'm blanking on his name at this point in time, but there are a lot of different college arms this year, and you look at the guys like Chase Burns from Wake Forest, who's one of the top prospects this year's draft. You look even some prep bats, guys out of high school, Connor Griffin, who's not in the College World Series, but still there are a lot of different prospects who will be on display so far in Omaha. But even kind of going further into it, the Nationals, if we're just making this national specific right now, they need arms. They need college arms because those are guys who are going to fly through the minors, get to the majors, help you out relatively quickly. And as we were kind of mentioning earlier, the Nationals, they're going through their rebuild process, but still they're not that far away from contention. So if we're talking about guys who can help them out, you look at Tommy White, another third baseman prospect out there. There are a lot of pitching prospects who will be in this draft as well. So at this point in time, I would look at college arms out there. Maybe the Nationals can kind of get lucky and have someone, whether it be a Chase Burns fall to you at number 10 there, whether it be another guy, whether it's Jack Caglianone from the University of Florida who can help you out and fall down to number 10. I don't think that'll happen at this point. I don't think Chase Burns could happen either, but there's a lot of talent on display. And if you were to get one of those college guys into this system alongside Dylan Cruz, alongside James Wood, you're going to have a pretty bright future.
Absolutely. And that's why I'm like, watching the College World Series, I mean, good Lord. I mean, we're already in awe of what we're seeing right now with Paul Skeens. I mean, the fact that come from LSU and just a bright future as a pitcher, and he's already right now really turning heads with the Pittsburgh Pirates is something that's very unbelievable. But yeah, absolutely. Finally, before we move on to the segment is I've asked a lot of people that have covered baseball. I'm a baseball background guy myself. I mean, I've watched it and played it since I've been in diapers, and I've loved the game. I mean, I've grown long roots that are just endless. But when I think about, because, the game itself, we recently, and thank God that Angel Hernandez has retired. But when I start thinking about the quality of just the control of the game, because it's not easy being an umpire, a referee, because in the end, you're taking control of how you set the tone of the game at the end of the day. Now, we know, I mean, I'm looking at CB Buckner, I'm looking at a lot of these guys, and I'm like, what is with the strike, the strike ball rate right now? It's out of control. So when you think of right now trying to adjust a lot of those kinks that baseball's currently going through, I mean, how would you kind of summarize this in the best description? What baseball, we know, we love this game. There's a lot of history, but we also know that we are very open and willing to innovate. I know a lot of old heads don't like hearing that, but when you look at it in the landscape, how the game can be better, and I would say at the same time, kind of help a little bit more with the viewership side of things.
You kind of mentioned it there. A lot of people, I'm going to surprise you here, Jake. I am a young guy. I'm 24 years old, but a lot of people would throw out there, well, help grow the game, have better umpires, have the automated strike and ball system there. I'm against that. Some people are really surprised when I do say that. Now, here's the thing. Here's where I can kind of meet you in the middle with. I think you should have maybe five challenges to challenge strike and balls, whether it be an 0-2 count, and someone that's obviously a ball calls it a strike 3. You challenge that, you get the ball back, and then we all play ball. It's going to be that quick, really that simple. But overall, I think baseball, part of the theater of it, I hate to say this and I hate to admit it, I've said this out loud on my podcast, Locked On Nationals here, but I think part of the theater is having Davey Martinez, the Nationals manager, get in your face. And you know what? Baseball does kind of have an issue when it comes to getting highlights out there. And obviously you got a lot of different star power out there. You have Fernando Tatis, Juan Soto doing his thing, but that's just kind of part of the game, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. Some people hate to just kind of think that. They hate to admit that. And some might say, well, why don't we just look at Ellie De La Cruz and see what he does? And that can be the theater. And you're absolutely right. But ultimately, at the end of the day, people like that kind of face-to-face interaction. They do kind of like that theater behind baseball. And I think that's kind of the truth that people don't really want to hear out loud. And I'm a young guy. Again, I'm a forward thinker. But I also kind of think that is part of the game. And ultimately, there are a lot of bad umpires out there. That's where you got to start off first. That's the real issue. As you mentioned, CB Buckner, he's now going to have the spotlight on him with Angel Hernandez out of the picture. But at this point in time, I think a cool little inventive way you can kind of meet your baseball purists between your your analytical forward thinkers like maybe yourself, I think we can kind of meet in the middle and just have a few challenges per game where you can challenge a ball or a strike and get the right call and then move forward. It'll be that simple. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if you do go that route, if you do have the automated ball and strike system, it's not going to be the end of the world. We'll all adjust. And some people might say it's best for the game. We'll see.
I like that. I mean, honestly, that's a great nugget to save because, I'm the kind that I'm like, I was raised old school and, adjusting to new school technologies. But I've thought of this is like, if an automated strike zone, I would like it where I have some sort of device that even if I got to have it in my back pocket where I can feel the vibration knowing that that's a strike. That was, technology is getting smarter every day. We got AI for God's sakes. But when you think of it, it's hard to argue that. But yet, where's the ball? Where's the strike? But I like that. I like that thought of 5 challenges up on there. I think that's more than fair. And I think that really does, because I don't want to take the morality of the game away. I loved it when umpires are, they're getting hammered down their throats from managers, which is like, it was so entertaining. But yeah, hopefully we can figure this out because I love it. I mean, I'm going to my second Major League Stadium in Coors Field next Monday. So I'm excited to see, and I'll get a full picture of Shohei Ohtani there behind the dugout. So I'd like to see for myself how it'll be. But yeah, it's a theater. It's a show. I mean, that's the way you got to kind of look at it.
I was at a Nationals game last year when, I don't even know if you may remember this, Jake, but it was a big story around town. Davey Martinez, luckily enough, I got seats behind home plate. It was one of the coolest things ever. And of course, that was a game where Davey Martinez got on his hands and knees and was just barking with an umpire. Literally was on his hands and knees. If you look it up, I Bleav it was around this time last year. He was trying to, complain about a strike that was missed by him and for what he thought. Ultimately, it was a strike against the Nationals, and David Martinez was in the wrong. But still, that was part of the theater. You had all these different highlight clips being sent out about how David Martinez is laying on the ground, and it's part of the game, man. 162 games, that's a lot, man. Like, I'm a baseball fan. You're a baseball fan. We'll watch all 162 of whatever our team is. But for the casual fans out there, it's entertaining. It helps grow the game, and I hate to admit that, but that is kind of the hidden truth behind baseball that makes it a little bit more exciting. And even as me, a purist, it's kind of cool to see. I like to see Davey Martinez up in somebody's face. You want to see that momentum shift. And it ultimately, guys ride off that as well. And I think most Major League Baseball players might say, like, hey, like, let's get all the calls right. That does make sense. But still, at the end of the day, it's entertainment. Davey Martinez on his hands and knees for arguing a ball and strike and trying to prove his point. That was one of the most entertaining things that I saw in 2023 from this Nationals team. And it was because you don't have an automated ball and strike zone.
Oh, 100%. The only thing that I'm missing up out of it that would have made it absolutely gold is when I get those grunt crawls when you're right there up on the ground.
yeah.
Seen up on the mound. Just an absolute hidden gem. But Ryan, appreciate you taking the time, and it was absolutely fun. Where can people find you and show off their attitude for those Washington Nationals?
So you can search up Locked On Nationals wherever you get your podcasts, including over on YouTube. You can catch me over on Twitter at Ryan Clary 11, and as well as our show page at LO_Nationals. But again, just search up Locked On Nationals wherever you get your podcasts, including over on YouTube. Hit that subscriber button. Jake, always appreciate the time, man. Thank you.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for taking the time. Enjoy the rest of the week, and we will see exactly what we'll figure out with the Washington Nationals come down the stretch, man. Take care of yourself.
You too, man. You have a good one.
Absolutely. Well, moving on from baseball, going on to basketball. And, I got a lot of question marks. What's going on with Trae Young? What's going to be happening with the Atlanta Hawks? But nobody better that covers the Atlanta Hawks, those dirty birds. Yes, we've heard of the Atlanta Falcons, and we got the Hawks. But to figuring out what's happening with those dirty birds, here is our good friend, Brice Lewis. So before we really dig in deep with the Atlanta Hawks, I just am like, we've gone through eras after eras of basketball. Jerry West as one of the many iconics. it's such a hard feeling because that's already the last couple days that we've lost very iconic people. I mean, Bill Walton, we lost him, and now we've lost Jerry West. I mean, to summarize this up, I mean, when you think of very iconic players who really meant something that shaped the landscape of the sport, that shaped the landscape of the league, I mean, like I said, I think the closest one we could have thought of putting a silhouette there on the logo probably could have been Kobe Bryant. When you think about that with iconic players, I mean, what comes to mind when you think of somebody, and especially someone like Jerry West?
I mean, like you said, man, he was the logo of the league. And, his impact on this league has been felt for years. I mean, we know what he's done in the executive ranks. We know the success he's had. Everybody knows about the LA Lakers, Shaq and Kobe. That was big for him. We know coming to the Clippers, taking on that challenge and saying, I want to see if I can get the Clippers up to that level. Obviously they did not reach the expectations, but they had some very fun teams and made the Clippers relevant, which, I mean, that's an accomplishment in and of itself. So I think for a guy like him who has impacted the league, he kind of was the model for the point for that guard spot for guys, especially at that time. Think about guys at that time growing up, and then he became the logo. Like, that was like the guy you would listen to, maybe watch film on while you were growing up, learning the game and trying to, model a game after, and I think his impact, the fact that he was able to impact in so many different ways outside of just playing the game, I always think always adds that extra bit of value, because the legacy you leave on the court is one thing, but the legacy you can also leave in the office is another thing. And so now, with the passing, everybody has a chance to reflect on everything and kind of appreciate everything that he's done. Because I think this is what happens. Even when Walton passed, it was, everybody was reflecting. You heard all the stories. You heard, so many people come out, make statements. Jordan released a statement today when on West is passing. I mean, it's like everybody now is just taking that time to kind of reflect and say, man, he really changed the game for before I got there. If you're guys like Jordan and them go, so like that to me, I think is one of the biggest things when you think about an iconic person, an iconic figure in the basketball game. And like I said, I know there were debates, oh, maybe we should change the logo, et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, the impact Jerry West will have and his just entire presence and his impact on the league, I just think, it's something that's going to be hard to match for anybody, even today.
Yeah. And, that's going to be hard. Like, even if it came to a point where you make a change of the logo, it's not going to sit well with everybody, because we've embraced it for many generations. And, and to the point, I mean, very well said, because I was very fortunate enough to have met the great Mr. Celtic himself before his passing, Bill Russell. I mean, the guy was taller than me, and I'm like looking up, I'm like, this cannot be reality right now. Like, and so, but you embrace it, and that's the kind of the one thing we reflect, we embrace it. And I mean, again, I know when watching Hollywood shows or Hollywood television, I mean, watching Winning Times, I thought was just pure gold, because the way that it just was in that time with the Lakers was something else. But to have somebody like that in the office, along with the teammates in the locker room, I mean, it's a one of a kind, and something that I think will forever, ever be etched with all of us, and even for the staple of the league. So getting to the Atlanta Hawks now, and I know this is the toughest conversation we know, but I mean, the Hawks right now, this is kind of the toughest point with around the conversation of Trae Young. I know, seeing the build with him coming out of Oklahoma, and a guy that really is another generational player at the point, a guy that is amazing when it comes to shooting percentages, and a guy that could very much boost up a team. But I mean, when you think about it and what the direction the Atlanta Hawks are basically going on, I mean, they finished third, in the Southeast. And when looking at this, I mean, how would you really kind of approach this? I know many teams are calling and many teams are willing to make offers, But how, if you're in that position as the GM, how would you approach this, especially when you're thinking of the bright young future for the Atlanta Hawks moving forward?
I think realistically right now for Landry Fields and those guys in the front office, and if it was me, I'm viewing it like this. You're in that mid-average mediocre tier right now. What you're playing team the last 2 years, so it's not like you're not closer to maybe making the postseason as the top 16. Obviously, you're in the Eastern Conference, so it's not that. It's not like you have to have like 50 wins and to get like 6. Like you can get 42, 43, and that may be good enough, depending on how the conference does that year. And so for the Hawks right now, I think they just have to make the best decision for them. I think, with all the rumors, and I think with all the stuff we're going to continue to hear as we get closer to the draft, and then we get closer to free agency and the new league year starting up in July, I think people are going to obviously ask those questions. Is that something that Hawks are really going to consider? For me, I'm not particularly moving off of him because I feel like with him, one thing that people sometimes forget is he's also one of the most elite passers in the game. There's not a lot of guys who can do what he does from a passing perspective. Does he take some chances sometimes passing the ball because he's so good at it? Yeah, sure. I know, but I think a lot of great players, you always hear about the quarterback with the big arm. They'll try to fit it in the tight windows just because they have the arm strength to do it, even though that can lead to turnovers. It's just something that comes with star players sometimes. So for me, I don't, I've always said this, and I've stood on this since the beginning of the offseason. Unless the Hawks get some Godfather offer for Trey, I'm not necessarily viewing him as someone who they're going to move. I think you got guys like Jalen Johnson, who's an up-and-coming star in this league. A lot of people are excited about him. Depending who you get with this first pick, that's another guy you're adding to the core. You got a couple of guys that a lot of people don't know about right now from last year's draft class. A lot of Hawks fans are excited about Kobe Buffkin, Muhammad Gay, guys like that. That we think with Trey in the picture, he can help those guys in his development because of his playmaking ability. And then we know what he can do offensively. I think people forget against the Boston team that's playing right now in the NBA Finals last year. I mean, even though they lost the 6 games, for those last 4 games in that series, Trey basically, I think, was number 1 in fourth quarter points for the playoffs until like the Eastern Western Conference Finals. And he only played in 1 round. He kind of showed you the level of player he can be, And I think that's just something you can't just give up, unless you're getting something that you can't refuse back, and I think that's where I think we are right now. I think I do feel like some of this is national media driven, just hey, the Hawks want to move off. And I'm like, well, who's saying that? Trey said he just wants to be in a winning situation. He never said, get me out of here, but some people are going to interpret it that way. The front office says they want to be competitive. The Spurs own the Hawks first round picks for the next 2-3 years. So it's not like they can just, tank it and then we have all these picks left. So I think right now what you're trying to do with what you have coming up with the draft being their first stop in that regard is just how can we continue to build, what players can we get to maximize his skill set, and then figure out, okay, what is the perfect formula? Because that's what every team is every year. It's a formula. What works? What is best around certain players? Last year, Dallas, for example, didn't work around Luka and Kyrie. Made those adjustments. Now they're a finals team. Every year, it's a formula. You just got to figure out what works. That's why we have the first part of the season. Let's see what we look like. All right, this isn't working. Let's go to the trade deadline, make some moves. All right, let's see what it works. So I think that's really the big thing. And so right now, I think the Hawks are just trying to put themselves in a position where they're just going to be in a better shape. And listen, Quinn Snyder didn't come to Atlanta to just rebuild and lose. He came here because he believes that they can win. Shams was on Jeff Teague's podcast and said Trey needs Quinn and Quinn needs Trey if they're going to have success in Atlanta.
No, absolutely. And that's a great point. I like it because, like I said, I mean, when it comes to, the draft and development, I mean, like I said previously, I mean, the NFL, you got guys that are ready to compete right now. And with the NBA, I mean, and I thought this past year with college hoops, I mean, it was an absolute dud in some ways because of just like, who am I really seeing outside of Zach Edey and like a couple of these guys, that could really step up to be the future star. I just feel like the products just got to get a lot better. I know the NIL, a lot of this stuff, it just kind of hinders it a tad bit. But if you get that in line and you get it structured, and again, I love kind of poking the bear a little bit, but John Calipari, this one and done deal does not work, and so I'm like, you gotta develop these guys, and maybe the NIL could really help these guys. But the thing about the Hawks, which I think really gives you hope and optimism, the number 1 overall pick. Now, we know right now this league is taken over by international stars. I mean, Victor Wembanyama, Giannis, and Jokic, and Doncic. These guys, I mean, they're a different breed. They are shaping for what the league, of course, is looking for, because after the NFL, the NBA, definitely the viewership, the way that they're kind of, setting together this whole thing, it's quality television. But at the same time, I kind of would like to see some competition from my domestic stars. So when I think of the number 1 overall pick, and there's a lot of speculation because there's Alex Sarr, there's Zachary Rezachir. There's a lot of guys that are up and in here. How do you think they evaluate this number 1 overall pick? Because we know teams with number 1 overalls, there's a lot of pressure, but there's a lot of hope and optimism there.
This year is different because, usually most draft classes, you either have a couple of can't miss or you have that just defined, he's it, like Victor last year. This year is different. And so it really just depended who got that first pick and what was the positions of need and what they needed. For the Hawks right now, I think they're in a position where they really need an anchor on their defense. They're one of the worst defenses last year in the league. Yep. And I think that's something that they are looking to address and improve. I think the biggest discussions have been Brice, Donovan Clingan has been gaining a lot of momentum as recently, and Alex Sarr. And then obviously there's other reports about them potentially looking at trading back if that's something they want to, a route they want to go. But I think they're looking to improve the defensive side of the ball. So I think you look at Alex Sarr, he's the most unicorn-like player in this draft. 7'1", 7'2", has a bit of a dribble, can improve that, can shoot a little bit, still needs some work on the offensive end of the ball, but you see the potential, defensively versatile defender, 7'2" guy who can defend wings. That is a very valuable skill to have in this game. And I think, when you see a guy like Kristaps Porzingis, I've said that if you look at the difference in the series between when Dallas played Minnesota and then what they're playing now in Boston, even though Kristaps is out right now, Rudy Gobert is more of that traditional anchor center. Yep. Where if you get him in certain matchups, you can take advantage of him. When you have Kristaps, he has enough foot speed. They've been attacking Kyrie and Luka on these pick and rolls because Kristaps is long, so he can still use his height and length, but still also get back to his guy. And it's not like you can just pass it over him. So I think, that's what value I think Sarr brings, is that it's just that versatility. It's just, like I said, he's very raw offensively. But the thing is, again, with a guy like Trae Young, he can get you easy shots, he can get you easy looks. That's something you can look at. When you look at Zachary Rezachir, he's a guy who, it just kind of depends. He's 6'10". I think a lot of people are looking at him as a 3. If he puts on weight, maybe a 4. A guy who some people wonder if he's an elite 3-and-D at the next level. And some people are like, well, if he's a 3-and-D guy, is he worth taking the first pick? And then one thing I always like to tell people when they're talking about drafting, it's all about potential. And it's all about what do you think they can be. Everybody makes an evaluation. Everybody has a perception of what they think a player can be. Mm-hmm. And so with Rezachir, it just, he's the least out of the 3 for me, because I feel like if you draft him, you're probably moving DeAndre Hunter. I don't know if Rezachir is better than Hunter right now. Like, I don't know how that's going to, I don't know how much of a needle that's really going to do for this team. And I think they need something more impactful. So then I think that's where you have this momentum with Clingan, because Clingan is viewed as the best rim protector in this class, like elite rim protector. He's also 7 foot, just long, he anchored that UConn defense that was dominant for the last 2 years in college basketball. And I think that brings a lot of value. And then Quinn had a guy like Rudy Gobert in Utah when he coached there. So, it's one of those things when you're valuing the pick, it's just about what are the Hawks comfortable with and what do they think can get them where they need to go. Clingan is probably the most ready guy out of the 3, just because he has a little more experience. He's a bigger player. The other 2 are skinny. They're sticks. So you have to go through the development of their bodies and things of that nature, which can also hinder, okay, how much do you want to play these guys compared? Richeche, you can probably play a little bit more. Sarr, we don't even know if he's a center, even at 7'2". Some people question if he's truly a center at the next level. So I think these are decisions that the Hawks have to make. And listen, there is a lot of rumors going on, and that's just what happens in the draft time. There's going to be a lot of rumors, and, you don't know what's real and what isn't. But at the end of the day, they're doing their due diligence. They're looking at every guy, and they're taking – and I think everybody's in play. And, luckily for all my Hawks fans, you're the first pick. So when they're on ABC at 8 o'clock, we should know at least by 8:30 what's happening with this team, and then we can go from there, because they don't have any other picks in this draft right now. So once that happens, we know, and then we can assess and have arguments online.
Yeah, I mean that's a great point, because, and it's funny you bring that up with as far as the size, because in the end, I mean that's a big difference maker, because I mean I've even said it too. I mean Victor Wembanyama, when he came into this league, I mean very tall, very lanky, but I'm like, if you put 10, 15 pounds on this kid, he could withstand the physicality. He could also, I mean, when we look at big sizes, even when we looked at Zion at the time, I mean, the guy was explosive. He was built for power by the time he came out of Duke. But the problem of it is that there was no consistency with the power to where he could stay healthy. Whereas on the opposites, you got a guy that's very skillful. You got a guy that's got a lot of promising hope, especially the size and length to defend and rebound. But add a few pounds up on there, then that way, then he can withstand the blows. So that's a great point. I like that. And so that is a big difference maker. And so when I think of the Hawks with it, and I mean, the Eastern Conference is wide open. And I'm sorry to say, but it's like the Boston Celtics, I know, are a deep team in what we're watching right now in the finals. But when I look at every other team in the Eastern Conference, I mean, these are gems, because either they got the chemistry and camaraderie right. You got the players that are building to the absolute potential from just a shooting perspective, a defensive, and also a box out type perspective, especially when you're attacking the perimeter and you're defending. So I think those are great key points. And when you think about that with the state of the Eastern Conference, because I did have a guest previously that covered with the Magic on their side. When you think about that with the Hawks, and a conference that I think is wide open, the possibilities are endless, where you have that time. You get the chance to really build, develop, and get this team back into consistency, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the biggest thing. I mean, the thing is when they hired Quinn, one of the biggest things they wanted was a guy who could develop, a coaching staff who could develop. Because this is just the truth, under Nate McMillan, he went out to the press conferences and said, we are not developing. When the team was still relatively young at the time. People forget, even when the Eastern Conference Finals run, I think Trey was like 22. Kevin Huerter was like below 25. Like John Collins, I think, had just turned 25. Like there was still a lot of young players on that team. So to say you're not developing and you have a lot of young guys is really weird to hear. Yeah. So I think with Quinn, they obviously wanted a guy who was committed to that. And Quinn loves teaching. He loves growing guys. That's why they hired the staff they have. And there's plenty of guys who were able to make improvements on this team from this past year. And there, like I said, there's a couple of guys from last year's draft class they're hoping to step up. And that's what they're probably expecting again with the draft pick this year. Whoever they bring in, developing, get them in the right position. They're not afraid to use the G League. I know sometimes it's not really popular to people. People think if you're a G League player, that means you're not good. That's not the case. It's just sometimes the team doesn't have a plan for you to play in the main team this year. But maybe in a year or two, they may. So I think that they follow their plan regardless of sometimes the fan backlash you get from it. So I think realistically in the Eastern Conference, because it's not a tough division, you have opportunities. I mean, people are looking at the fact that Indiana got there and was like, well, is Indiana good? Now, Indiana, I feel like one of the reasons why they got there is their type, their style of play. Because, I mean, they're built to score a lot of points. And then that's why they added Pascal Siakam to add defense. So if they could put pressure on you offensively and then they can play enough defense, yeah, they can win some games and win some series. And I think it's one of those things where you have to look at what could potentially be on the horizon. Like the Bucks were supposed to be the second best team, but they had injuries. Giannis and the Bucks. We don't know if Lillard,
coaching change. Yeah,
exactly. Doc. We can talk about Doc, but I think that opens up the door for the Hawks. Because the Magic are a team that's up and coming. So they're a team I could see improving. Cleveland's going to be interesting because it seems like they're going to run it back, even though there was a lot of rumors about them potentially breaking it up. And even with that, I mean, there's not really that solidified second team. Right. So I think, for the Hawks, for them, they're taking baby steps with this. You're playing team. You want to, if your goal probably next year is if we can get this team right, maybe get top 6, just so we can stop being a play-in team, and then see what happens from there. It's a process where they want to do it the right way. They've said they want to do it the right way. They don't want to rush it. I know fans get greedy and just say start trading everything away to get star players. But listen, I tell people, look at the Phoenix Suns. You look at the Phoenix Suns. If you want to do that, that could be your future. Especially when you get that second apron for the tax, you can't do anything. It restricts moves you can make to improve your team, and people don't realize that. Like, that's the reason why even Golden State now is even trying to get under the tax, because it's just they have to think about that payroll for years to come. And so, even though I know Tony Ressler, the owner, has been called cheap multiple times, yes, he should spend a little bit more money to help win. I think they're trying to make sure they're not putting themselves in a bad financial future, but also building this team the right way they can have success. Because the league is different now. It's not where it was when LeBron formed the Big Three in Miami, where you could just put super teams together and then you win. It's like nowadays, most of the best teams have depth. They have multiple guys. It's not just all on the star players, and then you just hope you get enough from the bench. Dallas has multiple people outside of Kyrie and Luka who can beat you. Boston, on record, Tatum has not really had a fantastic playoffs, but because you got Derek White, Kristoff, those guys can ball. Drew Holiday had a big game in the last finals game. It's very important to make sure your supporting cast is very strong to go with your stars. So in case your star is banged up or has a bad game, you still have people who are ready to go. And that's what I think the Hawks are trying to build in Atlanta, where it's like, yes, Trey's going to be the head of that horse, but we need to make sure we give him the structure that fits his skills, maximizes his skill set, maximizes our players' skill set. And then we think that can get us where we want to go at the end of the day.
What's funny is you bring up a great point, and I had a guest on earlier or yesterday that obviously covered the Lakers. And what I said about this, and I know we probably might reiterate back to, previously, but, when you think of big brands, and I've said it before, the Cowboys, the Lakers, the Yankees, when they hear that term rebuild, people freak out because it's nobody when you're a big money market that you've got television deals, you've got merchandises that are selling through the roof, and you got enough money to spend for star players. Why would we even think of the term rebuild? They freak out when they hear the term. But as for other organizations, that's a term that is not necessarily up on a rebuild, but it's basically building to get better to start to compete with a lot of these things. So when you kind of defer the two type organizations, the team that obviously has the control, they got the merchandises and the big boy money to spend, and then you've got the other teams that some people would think, well, the owner's kind of frugal, but in the same time setting up for the financial success. I mean, they take it at a different mindset. I mean, when you defer the two, I think that's about as pretty as accurate as you can get it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is too, in those big markets, there's just that you have to. There are so many people who really love those teams. They have huge fan bases, and they always want to be able to say we're good, we're great, we're in the running, everything like that. So sometimes outside of a few players, they really don't have guys that you kind of see the growth. Like if you think about the Lakers, when was the last time there was a player who was drafted there, grew there, became a star there?
Oh yeah.
Probably what, Kobe? Like realistically?
The only successful player?
Yeah, that, I mean, and even that is like, and so for them, they're always looking for stars. That's why they get LeBron, AD. They try to bring in stars. They try Russell. They may try to trade for someone else. Like, it's just, that's how they operate. Where teams like Atlanta, for a fan base and for a lot of the teams that are in a similar situation, they want that organic growth. That's why Oklahoma City, I've always said Oklahoma City, it feels like they always have a bunch of young talent. I've never looked at Oklahoma City as just super veteran teams because they have guys that develop there, they grow there, and they become a household name in that market, which then connects the fans more, which then is why the fans then invest so much into the team. It's not like we just throwing people on there and it's like, well, I guess we'll like him for the next 2 years. They have a impression that they're going to be there for a while. And I think when it comes to Atlanta's situation, I think Atlanta hasn't had a star like Trae Young since probably Dominique Wilkins in terms of draft, in terms of like being there. And I think the way the city views itself in the media is that, I mean, at the end of the day, the truth is just the national media doesn't really care about the team. I mean, that's just the truth. And I think Trae, especially with the Luka trade on draft night, I think a lot of people have been very negative about him, about his play, ready to say he's not good, ready to say he's overrated, ready to say that he'll never be someone you can win anything with, right? And listen, people can go back to 2021, and Trae said, a lot of people have said, if Trae never got hurt, Hawks might have been in the finals that year, Yeah. And so, and if they were able to be at that point with him leading the charge, then why can't they do it again? You know what I'm saying? So I think the city and the player relates very well together in that regard of kind of like, oh, nobody believes in us. Yeah. So we want to show the media and the national market what we can do. And so, and I think when you deal with the big markets, the media wants them to be successful. They already want them to be great. It doesn't matter if they're 500 basketball club, they're getting dominating headlines. That's why people feel like they hate ESPN and all these places, like was back when maybe we grew up watching sports and they were like, just, you had the little thingy on the side on ESPN in the morning and, they go through it with these, what segments are coming up. It felt like they cared about everything, where now it's like they're just focusing on big names and big brands because they feel like that's what generates ratings for them. And so
it's kind of,
it's definitely something that's interesting to talk about in that comparison between a big market and a small market. But at the same time, I think it's something that as a fan, I think you're going to be more invested in a team coming from that development mold than a team from the big market mold. Because really, you're such a diehard fan of the brand, where I feel like with the smaller markets, the fans are just a diehard fan of just the team, the culture, the people, the city. It's like all of it is involved in it. It's a much deeper process, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. And what I say is, and I think this is great. And I've even preached this to many people that I know in sports, whether big time athletes and such. What's funny is so much exposure tends to be a little bit of distraction. Less exposure tends to be more focused. They tend to really, attack it at the right moment. But a quick note before letting you go, could you have imagined? I mean, when I watched the Hawks team, I watched the Hawks. Could you have imagined with that roster where you had Al Horford, Jeff Teague, Josh Smith, and Paul Millsap, of what could have been with the Atlanta Hawks if they had just had a little bit more? Could you have imagined that with that roster?
I mean, it's one of those things where, people, it's always like they just need that star. And it's been difficult for Atlanta to get that star. But if they were able to get it, it would definitely feel like, okay, this is a pretty good supporting cast, pretty good starting lineup. We have some good bench players. We had some guys who were really good. I mean, closest thing we had was 2015 when we won 60 games. Yep. And I know people don't want to acknowledge it because everybody played, but I mean, people forget when we played Cleveland. I mean, that in that Eastern Conference Finals, I mean, everybody says everybody's banged up, but there's a difference between being banged up and being injured.
Yes.
And I mean, I remember, I think Damari Carroll had like a knee injury. Al Horford had like an elbow injury. Teague had an ankle injury, like stuff that was like actually slowing them down. That's why every player from that team will tell you, like, we were all literally dealing with some type of real injury trying to play. So it's not like you got the fully healthy 60-win Hawks team and then the Cleveland just like knocked them right out of the playoffs. It was a team that was banged up. But no one's going to give Atlanta that credit because they don't even want Atlanta to be there in the first place. And it was LeBron at that time who dominated the Eastern Conference. So, it's one of those things where maybe if we had a star, maybe that could have been different. And That's why I always tell people too, with Trey now in Atlanta, you have that guy who has embraced the city and the city has embraced him. So I don't think the Hawks are just going to move off of him so easily, because I say this is an important time. People are getting into the game, growing the game. They're gonna find who their favorite players are. Some people are gonna see Trae Young and say, "I love Trae Young," and then they're gonna love the Hawks. And now you're growing a fan base because you need those guys that you can connect and say, he really got me into the game, even if he got you into the game or got you into the team.
Yeah. Oh no, 100%. And what's funny is it's really something else. And I mean, I've never been to the South before. I mean, the closest thing I've been to when I've been to Atlanta's airport. And that's the only closest thing that I was going for a cruise. But I'm a traveler. I'd love to see what Atlanta's all about. I mean, when I watch the Braves, I watch the Hawks, I watch the Falcons, it's like they are so invested in. Now, this might be a little funny, but even I'm hearing a little bit of some chirps and some little chatters there in the hockey world that they were like, could you imagine if the Atlanta Thrashers made a comeback somehow? I mean, I don't know how the fan base would have taken that, but I'm sure, at that time, it was a little interesting when they were kind of around, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was funny because I want to say when they were around, obviously the Thrashers weren't the best team. So fan base was so-so. I think at the end of their years, they were actually a little bit better before they moved. And so it was interesting. They actually were becoming a consistently decent team and they moved. And then, I think they have a couple months ago approved some plans, or they have a plan in place for if they do indeed get a team back, what their arena is going to look like. Because if you ever do come to Atlanta and you go to a Braves game, I don't know if you've heard the place that the Braves play, the Battery.
Yep.
Fantastic place. Highly recommended. I like to call it, it's almost like a mini city where they play. Because you have the places you can sit, watch games, eat. You got hotels, you got apartments, you got places you can buy stuff in there. It's like a lot just in that section. Mm-hmm. And so I think if they bring the Thrashers back, that is something they're planning to do again, create another environment like that. And I think there is a lot of support. I think a lot of people are excited if that does actually happen. I think people want it back. I think people, when we got Atlanta United, people wondered, well, how are they going to handle a soccer team? They were breaking attendance records all the time in the stadium. So it's definitely here. I think, and remember, this is a big city. It's here. You have a wide net of people here. It's just about believing in it and giving it an opportunity. And I think they do have a lot of support for it. Now it's just about, can Atlanta, NHL get on the same page and say, okay, let's do it.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And, like I said, a city like Atlanta that has been very invested up into their sports, I'm not opposed to it. I'd absolutely would love to see, the Thrashers back. It's only what's going to make the city itself much bigger, much broader than what we normally would see, from other cities as well. But Brice, appreciate the time, man. Where can people basically find you to talking about all about those Dirty Birds in Atlanta?
Yes, sir. Y'all can find me on Twitter, Brice_2K, as you can see on the screen. That's also my Twitter handle, Instagram handle. Find me on Instagram that way. I mean, not Instagram, but YouTube that way. If you want to look for a specific show, Bleav in Hawks is the name of the podcast I do for Bleav. Just click in Bleav in Hawks. You'll find all that. We've been hot recently with a lot of guests trying to build up, since the Hawks are in a lot of people's talking conversations in basketball circles now. I'd also cover Falcons as well. So if you want to see my Falcons content, it's also my YouTube as well. Definitely don't be afraid to subscribe and support for a guy who's just trying to make it out here, man. So definitely appreciate it. I appreciate you, Jake, for letting me come on, man, and being on the show.
Absolutely, man. I mean, like I said, from to each his own. I mean, we're on the grind, man. I mean, I like I said, this week, I mean, I've had eight guests set this week. And so I'm like, I'm on the grind. I'm on fire with this. Same way with you too. Busy, man. There's a lot to talk about with Atlanta. So I'm excited about it, but appreciate the time. Enjoy the rest of the week, man. And we'll see what happens come draft night with that #1 overall pick for the Hawks, man. Appreciate you. Take care of yourself.
Sir.
Absolutely. Yeah, man. The guests that we've been having up on here, in 2 days have been fantastic. It's been absolutely phenomenal. But yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about, and again, I've never been to Atlanta. The closest thing I've been to is that humongous Atlanta airport that people can get lost in. I mean, look, I live in Denver, and I know I've been to DIA, and even you could get lost there, but Atlanta, Georgia's airport is massive. Anybody that ever takes the time, that ever flies in Atlanta, it's a great spot. But to the point I was going to make, because of course tonight is game 3. So here's the deal with this. So the report is Kristaps Porzingis, he's out tonight. This is arguably the biggest pass for the Dallas Mavericks, because as of right now, you watch with what's happening for the Mavericks right now. Like, it looked so marginalized in the first 2 games when Porzingis is there up on the floor. When you look at the last 2 games in the finals, you could tell how marginalized that thing looked, because Daniel Gafford and Derek Lively were just absolutely marginalized. When I look at the box scores from them, Gafford, 23 minutes on the floor, 6 for 9, had 13 points. And then you look at Derek Lively, he only had 2. And coming off the bench, especially with a guy with size, they could not figure that out. And this was game 2. And in game 1, when you watched it, that game 1 was just absolutely just opposite. And I mean, game 1 was just an absolute, it was a 20-point blowout from there. But Gafford got marginalized. Lively got marginalized. So Lively already, since with Porzingis on the floor in 2 games, he has a plus minus, and it's minus. 4 points total. Has already had to combine almost over 60 minutes on the floor, or at least 40 minutes on the floor. And then you got Daniel Gafford, who had 8 in game 1. And then when you watched game 2, he had something different. So he at least contributed as much as he could, but it wasn't enough. He had 13 points in game 2. So he's already got 31 points to his credit. But this is the game that this is open for them. Now, like most opportunities, when you are given the pass, when the best right now is not available, when you're given that pass, you are 2 options here. You either, one, you're caught up in the same stuff, expecting different results, and yet it comes up the same way. Or you learn from what you got in the first 2 games, and you adjust, and you get better. Now, again, it sucks for Porzingis. I mean, the type of injury, because it is a ligament, this is something that could keep him out of the series, which is unfortunate. But he has definitely contributed in both those games. And this is something that it's an injury that could be back in 4 months. So I think if the Celtics really do kind of play this right, I would not force him back. I would not put him back in that. But he's definitely looks like he's going to be shut down this series. So which means this is an open pass for the Dallas Mavericks. You're at home. You're in your home crowd. You're getting juiced up. Hopefully Kyrie Irving could step up and not be a shell of himself throughout it, because, again, Luka is just getting tired, wore out, and fatigued, which is not what you want. So this is why that I think the Mavericks have a very good open opportunity, because even though the Celtics have a 2-0 lead right now in the series, and yet Porzingis goes down, Gafford and Lively have to adjust to not be so marginalized in the previous 2 games that they've had against Porzingis, because they were able to shut down a lot of their shooters and box them and really make it Like, they were just annoying these guys. And so Boston did everything right. And yet Boston's got a lot more dudes. So can we see this be the game for Dallas tonight? Hopefully. And I would love to see a series. That's my opinion personally. But it'll be interesting nonetheless. But you don't take advantage of this pass. If you're Dallas, you're in big trouble. Because this goes down 3-0, it's over. I mean, I'm not going to say this is a sweep, but this is over. You could see how lopsided that this whole series has become. So take advantage of it, Dallas. You got a pass thrown right in front of your feet. Take advantage of it precisely, spread the ball, control, all those things to make it work. All right, folks, that's going to do it here for me on the Snake Sports Talk Show. Appreciate everybody who has taken the time to coming up onto the show. We've had amazing guests. Shout out to Brice Lewis and Ryan Clary for their amazing insights for all the teams they cover. Atlanta Hawks, Washington Nationals, you got it all. We got more and more interviews coming up, of course, come Friday. Off day tomorrow. I'm going to be enjoying some time around in the town. So, got a very great event that's a lot of fun. Anybody that's up and in the small town, definitely check it out. It's a lot of fun. Show is brought to you by BetUS, as right now the Lions are heating up. NBA Finals, Stanley Cup Final, and of course, Major League Baseball action, and so much more. BetUS, the leaders for 30 years in bet lining and sports betting all together. They've been the best of the best here in the market. Give them a try. BetUS.com. When you put $50 or more down in your deposit, 200% bonuses and 30 risk-free bets. With BetUS, where the game begins, and SeatGeek, $20 off of your purchase of your first ticket for your hot seat. Next sporting event, next concert, next comedy show, whatever it is, SeatGeek has you covered up on it. All you got to use is Snake Sports, the promo code for $20 off of your first purchase of your first ticket. Online and also on Google Play and the App Store. It's Jake Silva signing off here on the Snake Sports Talk Show. Appreciate all of you guys for hanging with us, and we will see you Friday here on the next edition of the Snake Sports Talk Show. Take care, you guys.